The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as Queen Consort Isabella adjusted her emerald necklace one final time. Today marked the annual Harvest Festival celebration, where the royal family would appear on the grand balcony to greet thousands of citizens gathered in the courtyard below. The tradition had continued for over 2 centuries, and Isabella knew that every gesture, every smile would be scrutinized by both the crowd and the ever-present media cameras. Princess Elena, only 8 years old, skipped down the ornate hallway toward the preparation chambers, her small tiara slightly askew on her golden curls. She had been looking forward to this day for weeks, practicing her royal wave in the mirror and selecting her favorite powder blue dress with silver embroidery. The young princess possessed an infectious enthusiasm that often brought smiles to even the most stoic palace staff members. However, tension had been building within the royal household for months. Isabella, who had married into the family just 3 years prior, often felt like an outsider among the established protocols and long-standing relationships. Her relationship with Elena had been particularly challenging, as the young princess remained deeply attached to memories of her late mother, the beloved Queen Sophia, who had died in a tragic accident when Elena was only 5. The palace staff had noticed the subtle signs of friction. Isabella's attempts at maternal guidance were often met with polite but distant responses from Elena. During formal dinners, conversations would halt when Isabella entered the room. Even during casual family gatherings, an invisible barrier seemed to exist between stepmother and stepdaughter, despite both their genuine efforts to bridge the gap. Sir Marcus Blackwood, the head of palace security, had been serving the royal family for over 15 years. A former military officer with an impeccable service record, he took his responsibilities seriously and had developed an almost paternal protective instinct toward Princess Elena. He had watched her grow from a toddler into a bright, spirited child, and his dedication to her safety was unwavering. As the family gathered in the antechamber before their public appearance, the usual pre-event preparations were taking place. Stylists made final adjustments to clothing. Security personnel conducted last-minute communication checks, and protocol officers reviewed the planned sequence of events. The balcony appearance was scheduled to last exactly 20 minutes, during which the royal family would wave to the crowd, the king would deliver a brief address about the harvest season, and traditional ceremonial flowers would be thrown to the gathered citizens below. Isabella found herself growing increasingly nervous as the appointed time approached. She had never quite felt comfortable with these massive public displays, preferring smaller, more intimate royal engagements where she could actually connect with individuals. The thought of thousands of eyes watching her every move, analyzing her interactions with Elena, and comparing her to the much-loved late Queen Sophia, created a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Elena, meanwhile, chatted excitedly with her lady-in-waiting about the festival activities planned for later in the day. She had been promised that after the formal balcony appearance, she could visit the festival booths set up in the palace gardens, try traditional foods, and watch the folk dancing performances. Her innocent excitement was a stark contrast to the underlying tensions that seemed to permeate the adult conversations around her. The king, Elena's father, had been caught between his love for his daughter and his commitment to his new wife. He recognized the challenges both women faced and had hoped that time would naturally heal the emotional distance between them. However, recent events had suggested that the situation was becoming more strained rather than improving, and he worried about the impact on Elena's emotional development. As palace staff made final preparations for the balcony appearance, Sir Marcus conducted his routine security briefing with his team. The balcony itself had been thoroughly inspected, communication systems tested, and emergency protocols reviewed. The ornate stone railing had been recently restored and reinforced, meeting all current safety standards. However, Marcus always maintained that when it came to protecting the royal family, especially young Princess Elena, no precaution was too small or unnecessary. The crowd outside had been gathering since early morning, with families claiming prime viewing spots and vendors selling festival treats and royal memorabilia. Children waved small flags bearing the royal coat of arms, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Local television crews had set up their equipment to broadcast the event live across the kingdom, ensuring that citizens unable to attend in person could still participate in this cherished tradition. Inside the palace, final touches were being applied to everyone's appearance. Isabella's deep green gown had been chosen to complement the autumn theme of the Harvest Festival, while Elena's blue dress sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. The king wore his formal military dress uniform, complete with ceremonial medals and the ancient crown that had been worn by his ancestors for generations. As they prepared to make their entrance onto the balcony, Isabella took a deep breath and attempted to calm her nerves. She had been practicing royal protocols for 3 years, yet she still felt like she was performing a role rather than living authentically. The weight of public expectation, combined with her complicated relationship with Elena, created a perfect storm of emotional pressure that she struggled to manage gracefully. The moment had arrived for the royal family to step onto the balcony and greet their subjects, unaware that this routine ceremonial appearance would soon transform into an event that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test loyalties, reveal hidden tensions, and ultimately change the dynamics within the royal household forever. None of them could have predicted that within the next few minutes, a single moment of conflict would escalate into a situation requiring immediate intervention, forever altering the relationships between the key figures in this unfolding drama. The massive oak doors leading to the ceremonial balcony swung open with a deep, resonant creak that seemed to echo through the marble corridors behind them. Princess Elena stepped forward eagerly, her eyes bright with excitement as she caught her first glimpse of the enormous crowd gathered below. Thousands of citizens had assembled in the grand courtyard, their upturned faces creating a sea of anticipation and joy. The sight never failed to fill Elena with wonder at the connection between her family and the people they served. Queen Consort Isabella followed more cautiously, her emerald gown rustling against the stone threshold. The magnitude of the crowd always overwhelmed her, and today felt particularly intense. She could feel the weight of countless cameras focusing on her every movement, recording each gesture for analysis and critique. The comparison to Elena's late mother, Queen Sophia, seemed especially pronounced during these public appearances, where Isabella felt like she was constantly being measured against a beloved memory she could never hope to equal. King Ferdinand emerged onto the balcony with practiced confidence, his military bearing evident in every step. He had participated in these ceremonial appearances since childhood, first as a young prince standing beside his own parents, and now as the sovereign leading his family in this ancient tradition. However, today he sensed an unusual tension in the air, a subtle electricity that made him more alert than usual to the dynamics between his wife and daughter. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause and cheering as the royal family appeared. Children waved frantically from their parents' shoulders, elderly citizens dabbed at tears of joy, and the general atmosphere was one of celebration and national pride. The festival banners fluttered in the gentle autumn breeze, and the scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider drifted up from the food vendors scattered throughout the courtyard. Elena immediately began her practiced royal wave, her small hand moving gracefully from side to side as she had been taught. Her genuine smile and natural charisma were evident even from a distance, and several members of the crowd called out her name with obvious affection. The young princess had inherited her late mother's ability to connect emotionally with people, a gift that made her beloved among the citizens and an invaluable asset to the monarchy's public image. Isabella attempted to match Elena's enthusiasm, but her waves felt mechanical and forced. She was acutely aware of every camera angle, every possible unflattering photograph that might appear in tomorrow's newspapers. The constant pressure to appear maternal and loving toward Elena, while simultaneously maintaining her own dignity and authority as queen consort, created an exhausting internal balancing act that left little room for genuine emotion or spontaneity. As the royal family positioned themselves along the ornate stone balustrade, the protocol for the ceremony began to unfold. King Ferdinand would deliver his brief address about the harvest season and the kingdom's prosperity, followed by the ceremonial throwing of flower petals to symbolize abundance and good fortune. The entire sequence had been rehearsed multiple times, with specific positions marked for each family member to ensure optimal visibility for both the crowd and the media cameras. However, as they took their designated positions, a small but significant conflict began to emerge. Elena, in her excitement, had moved slightly forward from her assigned spot, eager to get a better view of a group of children who were holding up a hand-painted banner with her name. The movement was innocent enough, but it disrupted the carefully choreographed positioning that had been planned by the protocol staff. Isabella, feeling the pressure of maintaining proper ceremony and perhaps influenced by her ongoing frustration with her role in the family, reached out to gently guide Elena back to her correct position. Her intention was simply to maintain the formal structure of the event, but the gesture was executed with more firmness than she had intended, The stress of the public appearance, combined with months of accumulated tension in their relationship, caused her to use more force than was necessary or appropriate. Elena, surprised by the sudden physical intervention, instinctively resisted the guidance. She had been enjoying the interaction with the crowd and felt confused by what seemed like an unnecessary correction. Her natural response was to maintain her position, creating a brief but visible struggle between stepmother and stepdaughter that was unfortunately occurring directly in view of thousands of spectators and multiple television cameras. The situation escalated quickly as Isabella, feeling embarrassed by Elena's resistance and hyper-aware of the public scrutiny, increased the pressure of her grip on Elena's arm. What had begun as a simple positioning correction was now becoming a more forceful physical intervention that was clearly visible to everyone present. The crowd began to sense that something unusual was happening, and a subtle shift in the atmosphere became apparent as conversations quieted and attention focused more intently on the royal family. Sir Marcus Blackwood, positioned strategically near the balcony entrance to maintain security oversight, immediately noticed the developing situation. His trained eye caught the change in body language between Isabella and Elena, and his protective instincts began to activate. Years of experience had taught him to recognize when seemingly minor incidents had the potential to escalate into serious problems, and every fiber of his being was now focused on the interaction unfolding before him. Elena, still not fully understanding why she was being physically corrected, began to show signs of distress. Her earlier joy and excitement were replaced by confusion and a growing sense of discomfort. The young princess had never experienced such firm handling during a public appearance, and the combination of physical pressure and public exposure was beginning to overwhelm her emotional capacity to cope with the situation gracefully. King Ferdinand, engaged in acknowledging various sections of the crowd, initially failed to notice the developing conflict behind him. His attention was focused on fulfilling his ceremonial duties and maintaining the dignified presence expected of the monarch. However, the subtle change in crowd dynamics gradually penetrated his awareness, and he began to sense that something was amiss with his family's positioning and interaction. The ornate stone balustrade, while beautiful and historically significant, stood at a considerable height above the courtyard below. The drop was substantial enough that safety had always been a primary concern during these public appearances, with specific protocols in place to ensure that all family members maintained safe distances from the edge. The recent restoration had included modern safety features, but the fundamental design remained true to its centuries-old origins. As the conflict between Isabella and Elena intensified, their positioning relative to the balustrade began to shift in ways that had not been planned or anticipated. Elena's resistance to Isabella's guidance was causing both of them to move closer to the edge of the balcony, a development that would soon capture the immediate and urgent attention of the security team responsible for their protection. The crowd below remained largely unaware of the specific nature of the conflict, but the change in atmosphere was becoming increasingly apparent. What had begun as a joyous celebration was gradually transforming into something more tense and uncomfortable, though most spectators could not yet identify the exact source of their growing unease. The stage was now set for a critical moment that would test the training, reflexes, and dedication of those responsible for protecting the royal family, while also revealing the true depth of the emotional fractures that had been building within the household for months. The tension between Queen Consort Isabella and Princess Elena reached a critical point as their struggle for position continued to unfold before thousands of witnesses. What had started as a simple protocol correction had now evolved into something far more serious, with both stepmother and stepdaughter locked in a conflict that neither seemed able to resolve gracefully. The physical nature of their interaction was becoming increasingly apparent to the crowd below, and the atmosphere of celebration was rapidly giving way to confusion and concern. Isabella's grip on Elena's arm tightened as her frustration mounted. The public nature of their conflict made her feel exposed and humiliated, emotions that only served to intensify her determination to maintain control over the situation. Years of feeling like an outsider in the royal family, combined with the constant pressure of public scrutiny and comparison to the beloved late Queen Sophia, had created a reservoir of resentment that was now manifesting in this unfortunate moment of physical confrontation. Princess Elena, initially confused by the sudden correction, was now becoming genuinely frightened by the intensity of Isabella's grip and the force being applied to move her away from her chosen position. At 8 years old, she lacked the emotional tools to understand the complex dynamics driving her stepmother's behavior, and her natural response was to resist what felt like an unprovoked attack on her autonomy and comfort during what should have been a joyful public appearance. The young princess's attempts to maintain her position caused both figures to shift dangerously close to the ornate stone balustrade that separated the ceremonial balcony from the significant drop to the courtyard below. The beautiful carved stonework, while structurally sound and recently restored, was not designed to serve as a safety barrier during physical confrontations, and the historical design prioritized aesthetics over modern safety considerations. Sir Marcus Blackwood's trained security instincts were now operating at maximum alertness as he observed the escalating situation. From his vantage point near the balcony entrance, he could see that the conflict between Isabella and Elena was moving them both into a potentially dangerous position relative to the balustrade. His years of military training and protective service had taught him to recognize when a situation was approaching a critical threshold that would require immediate intervention. The crowd in the courtyard below was beginning to sense that something unusual was happening on the balcony above them. Conversations were quieting as more people focused their attention on the royal family, trying to understand why the ceremonial proceedings seemed to have stalled. Some spectators with binoculars or telephoto camera lenses were beginning to discern the nature of the conflict, and whispers started to ripple through different sections of the gathered citizens. King Ferdinand, still engaged in his ceremonial duties and acknowledgement of the crowd, remained unaware of the crisis developing behind him. His attention was focused on delivering the traditional harvest blessing and maintaining the dignified presence expected during these formal occasions. However, the subtle changes in crowd response and atmosphere were beginning to penetrate his awareness, creating a growing sense that something was not proceeding according to plan. Elena's distress was becoming increasingly visible as Isabella's attempts to control her position grew more forceful. The young princess's earlier joy and excitement had completely disappeared, replaced by confusion, fear, and a growing sense of panic as she found herself being physically overpowered by an adult whose motivations she could not understand. Her natural instinct was to seek safety and comfort, but the public nature of the situation and the ongoing physical conflict made both impossible to achieve. The positioning of the struggle was now critically dangerous, as both Isabella and Elena had moved to within arm's length of the balustrade edge. The ornate stonework, while beautiful, provided only a minimal barrier between the balcony surface and the substantial drop to the courtyard below. The historical design of the balcony had never anticipated the need to serve as a safety feature during physical confrontations, and the current situation was testing limitations that had never been properly evaluated. Sir Marcus made a split-second decision that his intervention was now necessary to prevent a potential tragedy. His protective instincts, honed through years of dedicated service to the royal family and particular attachment to Princess Elena, overrode any concerns about protocol or the potential political ramifications of interrupting a public ceremony. The safety of the young princess had become his immediate and overriding priority, regardless of any other considerations. As Isabella's frustration reached its peak, she gave Elena a particularly forceful push, intended to move the child away from the balustrade edge and back toward the center of the balcony. However, the physics of the situation worked against her intentions. Elena's resistance to the movement, combined with the force applied and their proximity to the edge, created a dynamic that sent the young princess stumbling backward toward the very danger that Isabella had theoretically been trying to prevent. The moment seemed to unfold in slow motion as Elena lost her balance and began to fall backward toward the ornate stone balustrade. Her small hands reached out instinctively to catch herself, but the momentum of the push and her own defensive movements had created a trajectory that would carry her directly into contact with the decorative stonework at a dangerous angle and height. The crowd below, many of whom were now watching the balcony with intense focus, began to realize that something genuinely dangerous was occurring above them. Gasps and cries of alarm started to emerge from various sections of the courtyard as people recognized that the young princess was in immediate physical peril. The festive atmosphere dissolved completely as the reality of the unfolding crisis became apparent to more and more spectators. Sir Marcus Blackwood launched himself forward from his position near the balcony entrance, his military training and protective instincts driving him to cover the distance between his station and the developing emergency, with maximum speed and determination. His focus was entirely concentrated on reaching Princess Elena before the momentum of her fall could carry her into serious contact with the balustrade, or, worse, over the edge to the courtyard far below. The security officer's sudden movement across the balcony finally caught King Ferdinand's attention, causing the monarch to turn away from his ceremonial duties and toward the crisis that was unfolding behind him. The sight that greeted him was his 8-year-old daughter falling backward toward the edge of the balcony while his wife stood frozen in apparent shock at what her actions had precipitated. Television cameras and photographers initially focused on capturing the traditional ceremony, were now recording what appeared to be a genuine emergency involving the royal family. The footage being captured would soon be broadcast around the world, creating an international incident that would require careful management and explanation from the palace communications team. The next few seconds would determine whether this day would be remembered as a tragic accident, a heroic rescue, or something else entirely, as multiple forces converged on a single moment that would change the lives of everyone involved and test the very foundations of trust and loyalty within the royal household. Sir Marcus Blackwood's powerful stride carried him across the ceremonial balcony with the speed and precision that only years of military training and protective service could provide. His singular focus was reaching Princess Elena before the momentum of her fall could carry her into contact with the ornate stone balustrade or, in the worst-case scenario, over the edge to the courtyard far below. Time seemed suspended as he calculated angles, distances, and the physics of intervention, while his body moved with practiced efficiency toward the developing emergency. Princess Elena's world had become a frightening blur of confusion and physical helplessness as she stumbled backward from Isabella's forceful push. Her small hands reached out instinctively for stability, but the momentum was carrying her inexorably toward the decorative stonework that marked the boundary between safety and disaster. The 8-year-old's mind could not process the full scope of the danger she was facing, but her body's natural survival instincts were flooding her system with adrenaline and panic. Queen Consort Isabella stood frozen in horror as she realized the consequences of her actions. What had begun as an attempt to maintain ceremonial protocol and assert her authority had spiraled completely beyond her control, resulting in genuine physical danger to the stepdaughter she had been trying to manage. The magnitude of her mistake was becoming clear, but the speed of unfolding events left no time for apologies, explanations, or attempts to undo what had already been set in motion. The crowd in the courtyard below had now fully grasped that a real emergency was taking place on the royal balcony above them. Thousands of voices rose in gasps, cries of alarm, and shouted warnings that created a wave of sound that seemed to crash against the palace walls. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. Elderly spectators clutched their hearts in shock, and the general atmosphere of celebration had been completely replaced by collective fear and concern for the young princess's safety. King Ferdinand's realization of the crisis unfolding behind him triggered an immediate transformation from ceremonial monarch to concerned father. His royal composure dissolved as he witnessed his daughter falling toward potential catastrophe, while his wife stood motionless in apparent shock. The formal protocols and dignified bearing expected during public appearances became irrelevant in the face of parental instinct and genuine terror for his child's well-being. Television cameras and photographers, initially positioned to capture the traditional ceremony, were now recording what appeared to be a life-threatening emergency involving the royal family. The footage being captured in real time would soon be broadcast around the world, creating an international incident that would require immediate crisis management from the palace communications team and potentially reshape public perception of the royal household dynamics. Sir Marcus reached Princess Elena just as her small body made contact with the ornate stone balustrade. His powerful arms wrapped around her waist and shoulders, arresting the momentum of her fall and pulling her securely away from the edge of the balcony. The impact of his intervention was forceful enough to ensure her complete safety, but controlled enough to avoid causing any additional injury or trauma to the already frightened child. The moment of rescue seemed to suspend time itself as the security officer's training and dedication proved adequate to the challenge of protecting the princess from serious harm. His grip was firm but gentle, his positioning strategic enough to ensure that both he and Elena were now safely away from the balustrade edge, and his professional calm began to have an immediate stabilizing effect on the chaotic situation. Princess Elena found herself suddenly secure in Sir Marcus's protective embrace, the terrifying sensation of falling replaced by the solid reassurance of strong arms and steady presence. Her initial shock began to give way to relief, though the emotional impact of the entire incident would require time and care to process fully. The young princess's trust in her security detail, particularly in Sir Marcus, was reinforced by his successful intervention at this critical moment. The crowd below erupted in a mixture of relief, applause, and continuing concern as they witnessed the successful rescue. The collective tension that had built during the crisis began to release, though many spectators remained visibly shaken by how close they had come to witnessing a genuine tragedy. The festive atmosphere of the harvest celebration would be impossible to restore, as the dramatic events had fundamentally changed the nature of the gathering. Isabella finally broke from her frozen state as the immediate danger passed, but the reality of what she had caused was now fully apparent to her and to everyone who had witnessed the incident. The Queen Consort's attempt to maintain control and assert authority had resulted in placing her stepdaughter in genuine physical peril, an outcome that would have lasting consequences for her relationship with both Elena and the broader royal family. King Ferdinand rushed to his daughter's side, his paternal instincts overriding any concern for maintaining royal protocol or dignity during the public ceremony. The sight of Elena safe in Sir Marcus's arms provided immediate relief, but the monarch's anger toward his wife was becoming increasingly apparent as he processed the full scope of what had occurred and the potential consequences that had been narrowly averted. Sir Marcus, still holding Princess Elena securely, began to guide her toward the interior of the palace and away from the balcony where the incident had occurred. His priority was removing her from the public spectacle and the continued stress of being observed by thousands of people while she recovered from the trauma of her near accident. The professional security officer's actions demonstrated both his tactical competence and his genuine care for the young princess's well-being. The international media representatives present at the ceremony were now faced with the challenge of reporting on an incident that involved apparent conflict within the royal family, potential endangerment of a child, and a dramatic rescue that had unfolded in full view of the public. The story would require careful handling to balance journalistic responsibility with respect for the privacy and dignity of the individuals involved, particularly the 8-year-old princess. Palace staff members who had witnessed the incident from various positions were beginning to process the implications of what they had observed. The event would necessitate immediate internal reviews of security protocols, family dynamics, and public appearance procedures to ensure that similar incidents could be prevented in the future. The loyalty and discretion of the palace staff would be tested as they navigated the aftermath of this unprecedented crisis. As Sir Marcus carried Princess Elena towards safety and King Ferdinand followed closely behind, Queen Consort Isabella was left standing alone on the balcony, facing the reality of thousands of witnesses to her loss of control and the serious consequences that had resulted. The political, personal, and familial ramifications of this moment would unfold over the coming days and weeks, but the immediate priority was ensuring the complete safety and emotional recovery of the young princess who had been placed in such unnecessary danger. The immediate aftermath of the balcony incident unfolded with the precise efficiency that characterized all emergency protocols within the royal household. Sir Marcus Blackwood carried Princess Elena through the ornate corridors toward the palace's private medical wing, his steady pace and calm demeanor providing reassurance to the shaken child, while maintaining the security posture necessary to protect her from any additional stress or potential threats to her well-being. Princess Elena, still trembling from the shock of her near fall, clung to Sir Marcus with complete trust in his ability to keep her safe. The 8-year-old's earlier excitement about the Harvest Festival had been completely overwhelmed by the trauma of the incident, and her quiet sobs echoed softly in the marble hallway as they moved away from the scene of the crisis. The young princess would require careful emotional support to process what had happened and to rebuild her sense of security during public appearances. King Ferdinand followed closely behind, his face displaying a mixture of paternal concern for his daughter and barely controlled anger toward his wife. The monarch's royal composure had been completely shattered by witnessing his child in genuine danger, and the realization that the threat had come from within his own family added layers of complexity to his emotional response. His immediate priority was ensuring Elena's physical and emotional recovery, but the broader implications of the incident demanded his attention as well.
The royal physician, Dr.
Catherine Winters had been summoned immediately upon news of the incident, and was waiting in the medical suite to conduct a thorough examination of Princess Elena. Her preliminary assessment indicated no physical injuries from the brief contact with the balustrade, but she recognized the importance of monitoring for any delayed reactions or emotional trauma that might manifest in the hours and days following such a frightening experience. Queen Consort Isabella remained on the ceremonial balcony for several long minutes after the rescue, facing the crowd of thousands who had witnessed her loss of control and its dangerous consequences. The weight of their stares and the knowledge that her actions had been captured by numerous cameras created a profound sense of isolation and shame that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The Queen Consort's attempts to maintain dignity while processing her own shock proved increasingly difficult as the magnitude of her mistake became fully apparent. The palace communications team, led by Director James Harrison, had activated their crisis management protocols within minutes of the incident. Their immediate priorities included controlling the narrative surrounding the events, coordinating with international media outlets to ensure responsible reporting, and preparing official statements that would address public concerns while protecting the privacy and dignity of the royal family members involved, particularly young Princess Elena. Palace staff members who had witnessed the incident were quietly briefed on confidentiality requirements, while also being offered counseling support to help them process the traumatic events they had observed. The loyalty and discretion of the household staff would be crucial in managing the aftermath of the crisis, and their emotional well-being was recognized as an important factor in maintaining the stability of the royal household during this challenging period. Sir Marcus Blackwood's heroic intervention had not gone unnoticed by either the royal family or the thousands of witnesses who had observed his swift action to protect Princess Elena. His dedication and professional competence under extreme pressure had quite literally prevented what could have been a national tragedy, and the security officer's actions would be formally recognized and celebrated once the immediate crisis had been fully resolved. The international media coverage of the incident began to emerge within hours, with news outlets around the world struggling to balance their journalistic responsibilities with sensitivity toward the child involved in the crisis. The footage captured during the rescue would be analyzed extensively, and the royal family's crisis management team worked diligently to provide context and official responses that would help shape public understanding of the events. Winters completed her examination of Princess Elena and concluded that while the child had suffered no physical injuries, she would benefit from ongoing counseling support to help her process the emotional trauma of the incident. The physician's recommendations included limiting Princess Elena's public appearances until her emotional equilibrium could be restored, and implementing additional safety protocols for all future ceremonial events involving the young princess. King Ferdinand convened an emergency meeting with his senior advisors to discuss the immediate and long-term implications of the balcony incident. The agenda included reviewing security protocols for public appearances, addressing the breakdown in family dynamics that had contributed to the crisis, and developing strategies for managing the political and diplomatic consequences of the international media coverage that was already beginning to emerge. Queen Consort Isabella finally departed the ceremonial balcony and returned to her private chambers, where she faced the overwhelming reality of having endangered her stepdaughter and publicly demonstrated her inability to manage the responsibilities of royal family life. The Queen Consort's emotional state required immediate attention from palace counselors and advisors, as her actions had created a crisis that extended far beyond personal family dynamics. The crowd in the courtyard gradually dispersed, but the impact of what they had witnessed would remain with them for years to come. Many spectators expressed relief that Princess Elena had been rescued safely, while others voiced concern about the apparent conflict within the royal family and the circumstances that had led to such a dangerous situation during what should have been a joyful ceremonial occasion. Palace security protocols underwent immediate review and revision in response to the incident, with particular attention paid to positioning during public appearances, emergency intervention procedures, and the training required for all security personnel who might be called upon to protect royal family members in similar crisis situations. Sir Marcus's successful intervention became a case study in effective protective service under extreme pressure. Princess Elena's recovery process began immediately, with child psychologists and trusted staff members working together to help her understand and process the traumatic events she had experienced. The young princess's resilience and the strong support system surrounding her, provided reasons for optimism about her emotional healing. Though the incident would likely influence her relationship with public appearances and family dynamics for some time to come, the long-term consequences of the balcony incident would unfold over the months and years that followed, fundamentally changing the relationships within the royal household and the public's perception of the family dynamics. Queen Consort Isabella's position became increasingly precarious as the reality of her actions and their potential consequences became clear to everyone involved in palace life. The Harvest Festival celebration, which had begun with such promise and traditional joy, would be remembered instead as the day when family tensions erupted into public crisis and heroic intervention prevented tragedy. The incident served as a watershed moment that forced the royal household to confront underlying problems that had been building for months and to implement changes necessary to prevent any repetition of such dangerous circumstances. Sir Marcus Blackwood's dedication and professional excellence in protecting Princess Elena ensured that this story concluded with rescue rather than tragedy, demonstrating the critical importance of skilled and devoted security personnel in maintaining the safety and well-being of those they are sworn to protect. His actions on that day would be remembered as exemplifying the highest standards of protective service and personal courage.